Look at the sky. Look at the fires. Look at the oceans that no longer behave the way they used to. If you believe the 2026 Return of Christ movie is nothing more than Hollywood fiction, then you may have already missed the warning signs unfolding right in front of us, here, in the Pacific, in Australia, in our own backyard. This is not speculation. This is not sensationalism. And this is definitely not entertainment. Across Australia and New Zealand, we are witnessing patterns that experts struggle to explain. Extreme shifts in weather, land turning red with dust, waters changing color, systems breaking down one by one. What the film calls birth pangs is beginning to feel less like a storyline, and more like a live broadcast. So forget the polite introductions. Forget the comfortable distance. Because the next 12 months may challenge everything you think you know about the future, and about your place in it. This is not a video to scare you. It's a message to wake you up. We've all seen the headlines, even if we've learned to scroll past them. Extreme heat records broken year after year. Fires tearing through land that once felt untouchable. Dust storms turning the sky blood red. Oceans shifting color, tides behaving strangely, seasons losing their rhythm. What once felt rare is now routine. What once shocked us now barely slows us down. But here's the uncomfortable truth: normal is collapsing. In the 2026 Return of Christ film, these moments are labeled as birth pangs, early warnings before something far greater arrives. For many viewers, it feels dramatic, symbolic, cinematic. But for those of us living in Australia and New Zealand, it no longer feels like fiction playing out on a screen. It feels like a documentary that started without asking for our permission. Why now? Why here? And why does it feel like everything is accelerating at once? Scientists speak of climate cycles. Economists point to global instability. Politicians argue policy and power. And while each explanation holds fragments of truth, none of them fully explain the timing or the intensity of what we are witnessing. Systems that took centuries to form are fracturing within a decade. Social order feels thinner. Trust is evaporating. Anxiety has become the background noise of daily life. The film doesn't begin with monsters or explosions. It begins with unease. With a sense that something fundamental has shifted. And that's exactly where we are. People sense it when they wake up and check the news before checking in with their own souls. They sense it when conversations revolve around survival rather than purpose. They sense it when hope feels fragile, conditional, temporary. And then comes the disruption. Imagine waking up one morning and the sun simply doesn't rise. In the movie, this moment is portrayed as darkness, sudden, global, disorienting. But the real shock isn't the absence of light. It's what follows. Confusion, panic, silence. Not just in the sky, but in human systems. Markets freeze. Communication fractures. Authority hesitates. Darkness reveals more than light ever could. Because when the structures we rely on fail, we are forced to confront what we truly trust in. Not what we say we trust, but what we actually build our lives upon. Australia has always been a land shaped by extremes. Fire and flood. Drought and renewal. But what we are seeing now goes beyond natural cycles. It feels cumulative. Layered. Relentless. As if pressure is being applied from every direction at once. The film suggests these moments are not punishments, but signals. Warnings loud enough to break through distraction. Invitations to look up instead of around. To ask questions we've avoided for too long. What if this isn't random? What if this isn't chaos without meaning? What if history is not spiraling, but converging? In the early stages of the 2026 timeline, society doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes. Gradually. Almost politely. People adapt. They rationalize. They say things like, "This is just the new normal." Until one day, the normal they were clinging to is gone. And when that happens, the real test begins. Because phase 1 is not about disasters. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing that the ground beneath us is shifting, spiritually, morally, structurally. It's about understanding that comfort has made us slow to respond, slow to listen, slow to prepare. The film mirrors what ancient prophecies described long before satellites and supercomputers existed, a time when the world would be loud with information, yet starved of wisdom. A time when signs would be everywhere, but discernment would be rare. This is not fear-mongering. This is a reality check. Something is unfolding. And the most dangerous position is not disbelief, it's distraction. Because phase 1 is never about the end. It's about the moment you realize the story has already begun. When uncertainty stretches on long enough, fear quietly changes shape. At first, people panic. Then they adapt. And eventually, they begin to beg, not for truth, but for relief. In the 2026 cinematic timeline, this is the moment when the world starts looking for a savior. Not a spiritual one. A practical one. Someone who can stabilize the economy. Someone who can stop the chaos. Someone who can make life feel predictable again. History shows us this pattern over and over again. Crisis creates desperation. Desperation creates openness. And openness, when unguided, becomes vulnerability. Australia is no exception. When systems strain, people don't ask, is this right? They ask, does this work? The film captures this shift with unsettling accuracy. News feeds no longer focus on disasters, they focus on solutions. Emergency summits. Unified plans. New frameworks for peace and security. Language changes. Words like sacrifice, compliance, and global cooperation are framed as moral responsibilities rather than difficult questions. And this is where deception thrives. The greatest lie is rarely loud. It's reasonable. It's comforting. It sounds like common sense. The script makes one thing very clear. The Antichrist does not arrive with violence. He arrives with answers. He doesn't demand worship, he earns trust. He doesn't tear down systems immediately, he repairs them just enough to gain loyalty. And that's why so many miss him. Because we've been conditioned to equate peace with goodness, stability with truth, and leadership with righteousness. But the loudest voice in the room is often not the wisest, it's simply the most confident. In the film's timeline, people don't wake up one day and decide to follow darkness. They drift. They compromise. They justify. Step by step, line by line, until what once felt unthinkable feels necessary. The danger isn't tyranny. The danger is convenience. In times of fear, people will trade freedom for safety, conviction for comfort, discernment for certainty. And the deception works precisely because it doesn't look like evil. It looks like rescue. Australia, like much of the world, prides itself on independence, on skepticism, on not being easily fooled. But deception doesn't target intelligence, it targets exhaustion. It waits until people are tired of uncertainty, tired of conflict, tired of holding competing truths in tension. And then it offers rest. The film subtly shows how spiritual language begins to disappear, replaced by moral language without absolutes. Right and wrong become flexible. Truth becomes collective agreement. And anyone who resists the new order is labeled dangerous, divisive, outdated. Not because they are wrong, but because they refuse to conform. This is the turning point. Because deception is not about believing a lie. It's about rejecting the truth because it costs too much. The movie hints that while the world celebrates unity, something essential is being lost. A silence begins to grow, not the silence of peace, but the silence of discernment. The inner voice that once questioned, warned, and resisted grows quieter under constant pressure to comply. And this is where the open loop begins. Hidden deep in the final act of the 2026 timeline is a moment that most viewers overlook. Not an explosion. Not a speech. Not a catastrophe. But a pause. A global stillness. A sudden silence that settles before everything changes. It's subtle. It's brief. And it's terrifying. Because silence is often the space where decisions are sealed. Phase 2 is not about a villain rising. It's about a world lowering its guard. It's about the slow exchange of eternal truth for temporary order. And once that exchange is complete, there is no going back to ignorance, only forward into consequence. The deception doesn't announce itself. It invites you in. And by the time most people realize what they've accepted, the cost is already set. There comes a moment when even the best crafted illusion can no longer hold. In the 2026 cinematic vision, that moment doesn't arrive with warning sirens or breaking news banners. It arrives quietly, after the world believes it has finally regained control. The systems are stabilized. The panic has eased. People breathe again. And for the first time in a long while, humanity feels confident enough to look forward instead of over its shoulder. That's when the sky changes. Not gradually. Not symbolically. But decisively. What the film portrays next is not merely a religious event, it is a confrontation with reality itself. The atmosphere feels heavier. Time seems to hesitate. Across cities, coastlines, deserts, and remote outback communities, people sense the same thing at once. Something is about to interrupt history. This is the moment the script calls the return. Hope, which had been redirected toward leaders and systems, suddenly snaps back to its original source. Because when everything human has reached its limit, only the eternal remains. The sky breaks, not in chaos, but in authority. The film refuses to frame this as gentle or private. There are no hidden corners. No exclusive witnesses. From the most isolated rural towns to the busiest urban centers, every eye is forced upward. What was once debated becomes undeniable. What was once mocked becomes unavoidable. This is not a whisper. It is a reckoning. Australia's vast landscape becomes part of the scene itself. The open skies. The endless horizons. The sense of smallness that people feel when confronted with something greater than themselves. The movie captures this scale intentionally, because the return is not localized. It does not belong to one nation, one culture, or one belief system. It belongs to everyone. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because the return is not just about rescue, it's about accountability. The comforting illusion that truth is relative dissolves instantly. Every compromise, every silence, every decision made in the name of convenience instead of conviction is brought into the light. There is no escape through ignorance anymore. The film shows people reacting in starkly different ways. Some fall to their knees, not in fear, but in recognition. As if something deep within them has been waiting for this moment all along. Others freeze, paralyzed, not by the event itself, but by the sudden understanding that they chose wrong when it mattered most. This is where the silence from earlier returns. Not the silence of calm, but the silence of realization. Because in that stillness, the truth becomes painfully clear. Preparation was never about survival. It was about alignment. About where the heart stood long before the sky ever changed. The return exposes the difference between belief and familiarity. Between knowing about truth and living within it. Many thought they were ready simply because they were informed. But information without transformation proves hollow in this moment. The film does something bold here. It doesn't linger on spectacle. It lingers on faces. On the expressions of people who suddenly understand that the story was never about predicting dates or decoding symbols. It was about choosing faithfulness while there was still time. Because when the return happens, choice gives way to consequence. Australia's Watchmen, those who stayed alert, who resisted the deception, who prepared inwardly rather than externally, are not portrayed as perfect. They are portrayed as faithful, wounded, tested, but awake. And that distinction matters. Phase 3 is not the end of the story. It's the unveiling of what was always true. That humanity was never meant to save itself. That control was always an illusion. And that hope was never found in systems, leaders, or timelines, but in a promise. As the sky remains open, one thing becomes certain. History is no longer moving forward blindly. It is being reclaimed. And for the first time since the chaos began, the question is no longer what's coming next. The question is, were you ready when it arrived? After the sky opens, the world is no longer the same, even before it fully understands why. In the aftermath of the return, the film shifts its focus from the heavens back to the ground. Not to spectacle, but to consequence. Because the most powerful changes are not immediately visible in the sky, they unfold inside human hearts and across broken systems that can no longer pretend everything is fine. The first thing that disappears is certainty. Not the kind built on faith, but the kind built on control. Governments hesitate. Authorities fall silent. Emergency protocols mean nothing when the event they were designed to manage exists beyond explanation. The voices that once promised stability no longer speak with confidence. The solutions that once sounded convincing now feel thin, rehearsed, empty. And in that gap, something unsettling takes shape. Division. Not political. Not cultural. Spiritual. The film portrays a clear separation, not enforced by force, but revealed by response. Those who prepared their hearts recognize what has happened. Those who didn't search desperately for another explanation, another narrative, another way to delay responsibility. Australia's wide, open spaces become a mirror for this moment. Some people feel an overwhelming peace, not because the world is safe, but because their place within it is secure. Others feel an unbearable weight, a sense that an opportunity has passed that will not return. This is where regret enters the story. Not loud. Not dramatic. But crushing. The script doesn't portray people crying because of disaster. They cry because they realize they were warned, and ignored it. They heard the signs. They saw the patterns. They dismissed the urgency, believing there would always be more time. But time has shifted. The deception that once felt so convincing now lies exposed. The promises of order without truth collapse instantly. The leader who offered solutions is revealed not as a savior, but as a substitute, a counterfeit that worked only as long as discernment was asleep. And now, discernment has been awakened by force. The film shows communities fracturing, not because people hate one another, but because reality has drawn a line that cannot be blurred. Neutrality vanishes. Silence is no longer an option. Every individual is confronted with the same question, whether they are ready to answer it or not. Where do you stand? The world enters a phase of mourning, not for what was lost materially, but for what was squandered spiritually. Comfort, distraction, delay. All the small compromises that once felt harmless now reveal their cumulative cost. This is the most haunting part of the narrative. Because the pain isn't caused by punishment. It's caused by clarity. The film lingers on scenes of people standing alone, not abandoned physically, but separated inwardly. The realization sets in that belief was never meant to be passive. That preparation was never meant to be postponed. That watching the signs without responding to them was never enough. And yet, even here, the story does not end in despair. Because the same clarity that brings regret also brings truth. For those who remained watchful, this moment confirms what they held onto quietly, often at great personal cost. Their faith was not rewarded because it was perfect, but because it was genuine. They trusted not in timelines, but in truth itself. Phase 4 is heavy because it removes illusions. No more pretending. No more delays. No more borrowed confidence. Only reality, fully exposed. The film leaves us here intentionally uncomfortable. Because comfort is no longer the goal. Alignment is. The world has crossed a threshold, and there is no returning to how things were. The question is no longer about signs in the sky. It's about the condition of the heart. And as the dust settles, one final movement begins to form, not with noise, but with decision. A closing moment that will determine not just how the story ends, but where each soul stands when it does. In the final moments of the story, there is no countdown clock. No dramatic music to warn what comes next. The world doesn't end with noise, it settles into stillness. A stillness heavy enough to feel, sharp enough to cut through denial. This is where the film becomes deeply personal. Because by now, the audience understands something crucial. This was never about predicting a year, a date, or a cinematic event. Whether 2026 is a deadline or a doorway no longer matters. What matters is that preparation was never meant to be postponed until the final scene. It was always meant to begin today. The movie closes by pulling the lens away from global events and narrowing it onto the individual. One person at a time. One decision at a time. Because when the sky opened and systems collapsed, no one stood before truth as a group. They stood alone. And that is the most confronting message of all. The story makes it clear, no one drifts accidentally into readiness. No one stumbles into alignment by chance. Every prepared heart chose, long before the return, to pay attention when distraction was easier. To stay alert when sleep was tempting. To hold on to truth when compromise offered comfort. In contrast, those left standing in regret are not portrayed as villains. They are portrayed as ordinary people who assumed there would always be more time. More chances. More warnings. More space to decide later. Later never came. Australia's final imagery in the film is quiet, almost haunting. Empty roads. Still coastlines. Skies that feel closer than they ever have before. The land itself seems to wait. Not in fear, but in anticipation. Because even now, the message is not condemnation. It's invitation. The film doesn't end by asking what you believe about prophecy. It asks what you've done with the truth you already know. It asks whether your faith is something you visit occasionally, or something you live from daily. This is where the weight of the message lands. Preparation was never about stockpiling answers. It was about refining the heart. It was about choosing vigilance over apathy, truth over convenience, faithfulness over familiarity. And that choice was always available, long before the sky ever changed. If you're still watching, still listening, still unsettled, that isn't an accident. It means something in you recognizes the urgency. Not panic. Urgency. Because the signs were never meant to terrify. They were meant to awaken. To pull humanity out of distraction and back into alignment with what actually lasts. The world doesn't end when the credits roll. It begins to reveal itself. And whether the return happens sooner or later, one truth remains unchanged. Readiness is not a future action. It's a present posture. So the question isn't, will it happen? The question is, are you ready if it does? Not ready with theories. Not ready with timelines. But ready in spirit. This channel exists for those who refuse to sleep through the signs. For watchmen and watchwomen who choose awareness over denial, courage over comfort, and truth over distraction. If you're one of them, say it. Drop a yes in the comments if you're watching the signs with discernment. Subscribe to stand with a community here in Australia committed to staying alert, not afraid, but awake. Because the return is not a story meant to be consumed. It's a reality meant to be prepared for. And preparation begins now.